President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his capacity as Brics chairperson, is calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. He says the assault on the Palestinian enclave is a violation of international law and that disruptions to food, water, medicine supplies amounts to genocide. Brics also appealing for the opening of humanitarian corridors and for the release of civilian hostages. Ramaphosa has again called on the International Criminal Court to initiate prosecutions against the perpetrators of war crimes in the Israel-Hamas conflict.
As South Africa, we call for, first, an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. Second, the opening of humanitarian corridors so that aid and other basic services such as food and medicines can reach those in need. Third, all countries to exercise restraint and to refrain from fueling this conflict and making it worse, including by seizing the supply of weapons to the parties. Fourth, that those who are being held as hostages, civilians, should be released. Fifth, the resumption of a comprehensive dialogue led and owned by Palestinians and Israelis themselves and facilitated by the United Nations. And sixth, the deployment of the UN Rapid Deployment Force in Palestine with a mandate to monitor the cessation of hostilities. And lastly, the International Criminal Court should urgently initiate investigations against those who have perpetrated war crimes.
All right, let's get more detail now on the outcomes of that extraordinary Brics summit, which took place virtually yesterday. We're joined by Anil Sooklal. He is the Brics ambassador at large. Ambassador, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Can I begin the conversation with what appears to be the latest developments coming out of the Middle East? The Israeli government appears to have brokered some kind of deal between itself and Hamas. The understanding is that some 50 hostages will likely be released, and this will be in exchange for prisoners who are from Palestine. Your reaction to this?
Good morning, Corey. Thank you for having me. Well, this is a welcome development, and it aligns very much with what was stated yesterday at the extraordinary joint meeting of Brics leaders chaired by President Ramaphosa in his capacity as Brics chair for 2023. At the meeting yesterday, as you just heard, President Ramaphosa called for a comprehensive and immediate ceasefire for the opening up of humanitarian corridors. And this is also in keeping with the United Nations Security Council resolution that was adopted on the 15th of November, calling for a humanitarian pause and corridors being opened. So the development announced by the state of Qatar in terms of a humanitarian pause for 4 days initially, to allow for the release of hostages and exchange of prisoners is a most welcome development, and we hope that this is not just a pause, but it becomes a comprehensive peace. And as was stated by President Ramaphosa, and I must say the same sentiment was echoed by all 11 leaders that were in the meeting yesterday, that there must be a comprehensive, just and lasting peace, and that we call on the United Nations to bring back to the table the Israelis and the Palestinians to start negotiations to look at the creation of a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state. There is no winners in this conflict. This conflict cannot be won by the barrel of gun. There is no military solution. we must go back to the root cause of this crisis, and that is that the Palestinians have been denied statehood for well over 7 decades. And as South Africa, we have consistently called for a two-state solution with Palestinians and Israelis living side by side in independent states, a Palestinian state based on the 4th of June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. There's no other solution to this.
Ambassador, I'm glad that you've gone to a little bit of history, given the South African standpoint of a two-state solution. And this is, of course, echoed by many other governments around the world, including the United Nations, who were part of your meeting. But there is a caveat to this latest development, or should we call it this deal, this 4-day truce. And that is that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is clear that after 4 days, it would appear that bombardment is going to continue. What is the central message, perhaps, would you say, came out strongly out of this Brics extraordinary summit, given that there were these powerful leaders of the various nations that would have made a number of comments about this war, this ongoing war?
Well, yesterday there was a strong call for a permanent cessation of hostilities and for a lasting and just peace in order to create an enabling environment to look at addressing the root cause of the Palestinian suffering, and that is to return to the negotiating table. A diplomatic solution is the only solution, and this has been echoed over the past several decades at various international conferences, both at the UN and various other initiatives within the region and abroad. And this is what South Africa has been saying. And I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is short-sighted in thinking that the bombardment could continue after 4 days. It will not resolve the situation. It will further exacerbate the situation and lead to more violence and the loss of innocent lives. It's unfortunate that in this day and age that over 14,000 Palestinians, innocent civilians, children, women, babies, are being sacrificed at the barrel of the gun, and the Israelis using undue force against innocent civilians. This will not solve the problem. It will not create a stable and viable Israeli state, a secure Israeli state. It will not, unless you address the plight of the Palestinians. You cannot continue denying them statehood.
Ambassador, something quite striking yesterday came out, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong here. The President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, again echoing a previous sentiment that the leadership of Israel must be sent to the ICC for criminal prosecution in what the South African government believes are war crimes and genocide that are taking place in Gaza right now. But yesterday he said something that I thought was quite striking, in that he also says Hamas must be held accountable for what occurred, what sparked this latest incursion on October 7. When he says Hamas must be held accountable, he's very clear on the Israeli side that you must go to the international court and answer to war crimes. But when it comes to Hamas, what would that being held to account for the October 7 incursion mean in practice?
Well, look, I think our president has been very balanced in his approach to the crisis in Gaza, in him calling for all parties to be held accountable. Excuse me, whether it's Hamas or whether it's the Israeli government. All parties that have been responsible for violence in the region, for the loss of lives, for the destruction of infrastructure, over 40,000 homes, they must be held accountable. And this is why our president has called for all parties that have been responsible for the violence in Gaza to be held accountable. And I think that's the role of the United Nations as the global body, the United Nations Security Council, that is tasked with upholding global peace and security. This is their responsibility. And as you know, South Africa, together with 4 other countries, have also referred Israel to the ICC in terms of war crimes being committed in Gaza. So, and various other countries, including yesterday, a number of Brics countries stated the same position and supported South Africa's call. Because we are seeing a humanitarian catastrophe, the wanton loss of innocent lives in this day and age, and by and large, the major part of the global community is witnessing this, and I believe that we need to exert more pressure on the Israeli government to stop the killing, especially of innocent civilians. This is not going to solve the problem, and this is not going to resolve the situation with Hamas in terms of Israel and Hamas.
Ambassador, yesterday, this extraordinary summit, and I'm thinking here that the reason it was billed in that way is that it was a special summit convened specifically to respond to what is going on in the Middle East. However, there were notable absentees. The UN Secretary General was represented by an official. The leader of India, Narendra Modi, was also represented by a senior official from that country. Should we read anything into that?
Not at all, because both the Foreign Minister of India as well as the Foreign Minister of Argentina tabled statements on behalf of the leaders. They participated fully in the meeting and were party to the discussions, as well as the chair's summary that was subsequently issued. So, as you know, this meeting, given the urgency of the situation, was called at very short notice by our president in his capacity as chair of Brics. And as you know, heads of state, heads of government have a very hectic schedule, and we were given notice in advance that Prime Minister Modi is not available on the set date and time, and likewise with President Fernandez as well of Argentina. Yeah. So I don't think we could read anything into it because we had their statements tabled at the meeting.
Critics who would have followed this summit and indeed the statements of the different leaders will probably have said that the participation and indeed the comments of the Russian leader perhaps would suggest a believability crisis on the part of this Brics grouping. Would you go along with that kind of sentiment that, yes, this is a powerful grouping that should not be undermined or overlooked? However, the participation of Russia, given what is going on between itself and Ukraine, does have some measure of a believability crisis there. Do you agree?
Well, not at all. Russia is a full member of Brics and still a respected member of the international community. They are a powerful member of the international community, being a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. They exercise major influence on global peace and security. Yes, they are involved in a situation in the Ukraine, and the global community, including Brics, have been involved in trying to broker truce even in that conflict. And I think Russia has an important role to play. Let us not forget that Russia is part of the quartet that has been seized with trying to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for several years now. So Russia is an integral part in terms of the resolution, the comprehensive resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't think you can marginalize a P5 member from this process.
Final question to you, Ambassador, and very briefly, if you can. The South African Parliament adopting a resolution yesterday, or should we say a motion that was tabled on the closure of the Israeli embassy in South Africa. That motion did pass. Do you think that it is counterproductive, counter intuitive to what South Africa is trying to do, and that is to occupy this seat of being a global peacemaker, if you like?
Well, look, this is a highly emotional issue. It's an issue that's very close to the heart of South Africans, given the historical partnership that we've had with the Palestinian people. They stood side by side in supporting our own freedom struggle, and we stood with them also and continue to stand with them. And I think rightly so, there must be robust discussions within our parliament. Our parliament is a democratic parliament, and as I've indicated, Parliament has taken a decision in this regard. We'll have to wait and see whether this decision is referred to government for reflection by Cabinet and see how this develops. But one can understand why Parliament has, the majority of parliamentarians have taken this action, given what is happening in Gaza at the present time. And I must also stress that we as South Africa have always indicated that all conflicts, whether it's in Africa, Europe, Asia, Middle East, they all must be treated on an equal basis. There is no situation where some conflicts are more important than the others. And if you look at the amount of resources that have been pumped into Ukraine in terms of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and those very countries are on the margins in terms of what is happening in Gaza today. And we would like to call upon them to exercise the same level of interest and resources into the Gaza situation and to prevail on the Israelis to stop the violence and go back to the negotiating table.
Brics Ambassador at Large, Anil Sooklal, let me thank you very much for your time and indeed the contributions to this ongoing conflict in the Middle East.